Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, a $250 gaming PC is something that's a little harder to achieve these days, but still possible, and the results are shown here. As you guys can see, I have a fully custom built PC for $250, just a little bit under. Now, before I go over the parts and everything, I wanted to tell you guys I had a couple of rules when going into this. First of all, I didn't want to do any Optiplex drop-in upgrades. I didn't want to grab an office PC and drop a GPU. This had to be something custom built. Every part had to be a part in itself that I put together into a PC. No selling things to get back to the original cost as well. I don't like any fishy stuff like that. Let's say however much money you have in hand should be able to get you a PC today. I want this to be a little bit recreatable to people who want to make their first gaming PC and don't have that much money, because this is about the price of a console. Now, I'm using a combination of AliExpress and local deals. Starting off with the bread and butter of this PC, we got the CPU, and that is the Intel Xeon 2650 V4. It is a 12-core, 24-threaded processor, has a up to 2.9 gigahertz boost. Not a very high clock speed, but the cores should be more than sufficient to make up for that. Next, we have the GTX 1080 for our GPU. This is going to be a Dell OEM variant. These are a little bit hard to find, but this is from an Alienware pre-built, from what I can tell, and the research that I've done. It has 8 gigabytes of GDDR5. It is not exactly 11 gigabytes like the infamous 1080 Ti. But nonetheless, it's a great GPU. I didn't want to go with anything less than 8 gigabytes. For the motherboard, we have the Machinist X99 PR9 motherboard we got from AliExpress. This is the 2011-3 socket. Normally, the easiest way to go about this is to head on AliExpress and look at the motherboard bundles. Things that come with the CPU, RAM, and the motherboard as well, because it's going to be very counterintuitive to try and find the right CPU for the right motherboard. Those bundles just give you the CPU that works. Usually that's what I do, but to my knowledge, this 2650 V4 works in most of these 2011-3 motherboards. They're a little different. Some of them take DDR3, some of them take DDR4. You just have to do your research on this. We also got 16 gigabytes of DDR4 to 8 gigabyte sticks. Now, in the PC, the CPU only supports 2400 mega transfers, so that is what we're running at, but these are rated at 3200 megahertz speed. Now, when it comes to the SSD, things get a little bit weird. I'm using a free SSD that I had on hand, but I also did include the cost of the cheapest 120 gigabyte SSD using for your boot. That's what I did in the same scenario. I just used a 500 gigabyte for my boot. I also got this 2 terabyte Western Digital Green Caviar hard drive. It's like called Caviar Green, and this was free. I was able to trade a couple of SSDs, 2 of them that was like a 60 gigabyte drive and a 128 gigabyte, and 1 SSD that was broken, but I was able to trade that, and he gave me a 2 terabyte hard drive in return. This guy was also selling many of them, so I would say it's kind of viable to do that kind of trade. Otherwise, it would have been $25. For the case, we have an iBuyPower, kind of a pre-built case. It's weird. It's not proprietary. It has all the connectors that you need. It's perfectly fine. It has some fans, and it works. $25. For the power supply, we have an EVGA 400 watt, non-80 plus rated. It was $40 brand new. I like to get power supplies brand new, just personal preference, but you can get them for way cheaper if you get them used. Some people even bundle them with graphics cards, or bundle graphics cards with power supplies. I don't know why, but those go hand in hand sometimes. So look out for bundles. You can get yourself a little deal. Now, the CPU cooler I used is the Up Here P4K on Amazon for $20.99, but I am recommending a different cooler because I just had to get this on hand. It was the quickest thing I could obtain within 2 days. The one I want you guys to use is going to be the ICE 200 Pro and the ICE 400 SE. I will throw those on the screen if I'm missing the terms by a word or two, but these are going to be around $7-8. It's going to get you the same cooling, the same performance, and it's going to be perfect for this Intel Xeon processor. Wrapping it up with the price, this comes out to $211 with the cheapest 120GB SSD included and that AliExpress CPU cooler. Now, the biggest thing that brings you the value for your dollar in this gaming PC is going to be that Xeon processor. Now, this 2650 V4 is obtainable for around $7 to $8. My original saying was going to be that it was cheaper than your lunch combo, but then McDonald's had to just release some fire fucking lunch combos, so it is no longer cheaper than a lunch combo, technically. But for $7 to $8, you cannot even beat the price to performance that this CPU is providing. It is literally providing cents per frame for your dollar. I think that's pretty amazing, and just in general, when you're paying that much for a CPU, it gives you a lot more headroom with your budget to spend on everything else. As you can see with this build, we were even able to get a GTX 1080, which is still a good GPU in 2024. Starting off with our first title of benchmarking, it is Overwatch 2. This is not a really hard game to run at all. It runs flawlessly. The temperatures are not bad either, and you see the GPU sits around 60-70%, usually 80%, and the Celsius temperatures are not bad at 74 for the GPU and 40s for the CPU. RAM usage is very normal. It's very good. It allows you to get these smooth frame rates. I'm at a 240Hz monitor, so you can almost get it locked to 240 on here if you just hit VSync, and the average is going to be a little bit higher than 116. It's more like 150. I've literally gotten a 176 average before. Kicking it off with our next esports title, we have Fortnite at 1080p low settings, epic view distance. We're also running on the performance mode, so it's not DX11 or DX12. It yields much more performance for any kind of CPU. In the reload mode, you're going to see just under 200 FPS in the very high hundreds, sometimes the low 200s. But in the Battle Royale mode, it is more around like 120 to 150 FPS. It's pretty fine. It works really good, and once you get rid of the stutters from, you just play a couple of games, it runs perfect. Everything is very nice, even with the 240Hz refresh rate. Very competitive experience. These frames do matter when you're playing games like this. I will put the average on screen because that 82 FPS is not accurate. Now we are playing another game called Friends vs. Friends. It's a little bit of an indie title, but it is a 2v2 competitive shooter. As you can see, it's very fast paced, and this is something where you want all the FPS possible. It's a very cartoonish game, but as I've seen, it becomes a little intensive graphically, and I can't really tell if that lies on the GPU or the CPU, but it looks like both. To me, it looks more of like the GTX 1080, but the FPS is pretty good. Our average is 110 FPS after all our testing. 1080p lowest settings, I believe this is like on DX11 or something like that, but it plays very good, does not stutter too much, the temperatures are fine. I just want to show you guys what kind of diverse games you can play when you build this kind of PC. Moving on to our more competitive and intensive titles, it's going to be Modern Warfare Warzone. As you can see, this PC is chugging. It's working really well, running around 80 FPS. That's kind of what I'm seeing the whole time. I don't see anything more than 80, 90 maybe. This is in the big BR map, like I was saying. This is all rendered in with that CPU, and it is literally, you can see that the CPU is at about 60% to 70%. It's going to work. So I think this game really kind of put that CPU to the test, and I think it really passed that test. You can see the RAM usage, you can see the temperatures, everything's running fine. And this is the lowest preset. We did not do any balanced settings or ultra, none of that. I feel like the FPS averages would be way lower, but if you need a Warzone experience, 60 plus FPS, which is better than console, by the way, there you go. It's very great and works nice. Next up on another kind of intensive title, but showing a very well optimized game, is Star Wars Battlefront 2, and this is mainly due to the Frostbite engine. We are running at 1080p all low settings, but it still looks beautiful. I mean, especially this map, I feel like this is the best case scenario here, is that all of them look good, but this one just still looks beautiful. The vegetation, the fog, the density, and it's keeping it very high FPS. Our average came out to around 150, and this is the Battlefield games. The Frostbite engine runs very, very well. I don't know why, but I think a bigger part of this game was that it was released at the time of the hardware with the 1080 and all that, so it was very optimized for these cards. A lot of the 10 series cards were very, very optimized with games, and developers were optimizing developers were optimizing their games for them. Moving on to, should you do this? Yes. I normally would not say yes for something like this, for something so cheap. I even am making a video for a $100 PC, and I wouldn't recommend that. If you're doing a $100 PC like for gaming, I wouldn't exactly recommend that. If you need a computer, yes. In all case scenarios, whatever reason you're going to need a computer for, it's going to be very well off for that use. Something like this is very practical, but I would see this being recreated for, more around like 300, just under 300. I swear you can get something like this going. Get a really cheap case, get a cheap power supply, and that processor, guys. $7 to $8 for that damn processor is a frame spitter. The FPS numbers speak for themselves, but the value for the dollar here is so good. And just kind of speaking on a different note, there is no upgrade path with this, as most of you have seen, but this Xeon processor is so viable. Like, it can provide good price to performance, even comparing to like $300, $400 PCs. Considering the way you go about it, you can make your upgrade much easier if you want to jump to something like the AM4 platform. You can get one of these motherboard bundles, and it is not a diminishing return, and I mean that for the X99 motherboard. It came out to under $50 for CPU and motherboard. So then once you get your DDR4, you get a compatible motherboard. Like I said earlier, you want to get those ones with DDR4, those kits. You can just save your cooler, save your DDR, save your graphics card, and then grab a new Ryzen board. So the only thing that you'd be having to get is a Ryzen CPU and a Ryzen motherboard. Save some money until you're ready to get something really powerful going. There's no diminishing return, and I don't think anyone should be feeling left out when they purchase a processor like this. You only spent $40 to get on that platform, and you're not losing out on a significant amount of money compared to getting an AM4 board and then going to AM5 after all that money you had just spent on AM4. It's pointless, and there's a diminishing return in that. So considering the way you go about it, it can be very easy to jump out of this motherboard platform while saving yourself money and recycling a lot of the parts you already have. Furthermore, leave a like on the video if you liked it, leave a dislike if you didn't. Make sure to comment and let me know what kind of computers you guys are running if you're running a super budget computer. But thank you everyone for watching. Have a good day, have a good night, have a good evening wherever you are. Take care everyone.